This word here that they translate very proudly, Gaboa, is how you say that. And that just means high. They say it twice. There's a paradigm here. The idea of height and strength. God looks at the heart. They are looking at the outward appearance, something that's high. That is now, in this book, going to be brought low. Who, in this book, is described in physical stature terms? Saul, Goliath. Again, the prism is setting us up to view these things as we unpack the story. Today we're going to look at 1 through 11. I want to talk to you, I want to share with you about why we should listen to Hannah's prayer. Now, obviously we would say, of course, it's Scripture, but I think the point of all of this is, why is it that a prayer is even recorded? And that's what I want us to focus on today. She's giving us, again, the point of chapters, I think, 1 and 2, certainly the portions that we will deal with, are an establishing point of the entire book, right? So what we've done in the Gospel of Mark, let's say, on Wednesday nights, is we tried to always do the context first. What was the historical context? What was the contextual context? What's Mark trying to get us to understand? Well, really, that's what we're doing in Samuel as well. Chapter 1 and chapter 2 are starting us off saying, here's how you should read this book. Right? This is why we have our thesis statement. This is why we have this whole prayer. This whole prayer is a way of saying, here's the prism through which you should look at the whole thing. Okay? So lean into this, and we'll have a lot, I think, to say about this. Let me tell you a story first. The year was 1950. The United States was engaged in the Korean War back then. During the winter of that year, right, at a place called the Chosin Reservoir, if you've heard that name, in North Korea, the weather there was especially terrible and brutal. Temperatures dropping well below 0 degrees, and ice and snow is on the ground everywhere. The 1st Marine Division found itself at that time in that reservoir, completely cut off and surrounded by 120,000 Chinese troops. They were surrounded at a ratio of 4-1. And what they found is that these Chinese divisions, they had surrounded them on all sides, north, south, east, and west. When the Marines found out about all of this, they knew a couple things. They knew that retreat was impossible. Where are you going to go? They also knew that even getting critical supplies, food, ammo, water, was next to impossible. So what do? Here's what they did. Here's what went through the whole group. Almost all of them were at this idea of saying, we're done for, right? Here I am, 15,000 miles away from home, roughly, and this is where I meet my end. We're going to be annihilated right here. Everybody's thinking this, except for one guy. One guy sees this, but he sees something different. Now, when this commander, and that was who he was, this commander was a guy by the name of Lieutenant General Louis Chesty Puller. Now when Puller, he gets the same intel, but he sees something totally different. He sees that his men are panicking. He sees the situation. When he gets the intel, he stands up immediately. He wants to address his men. And so he gathered his men. He puts them around a map, and he points out to them some things, and then he says one of the most iconic battlefield statements in the history of the Marine Corps. Here's what he says. We've been looking for the enemy for some time now. We finally found him. They're on our right, they're on our left, they're in front of us, they're behind us. They can't get away this time. Now that's a bad dude, okay? If you've ever been in a position where you felt like your literal life was on the line, it's a very sobering moment, and that's a bad dude. Now, this is what it means to have a paradigm shift. This is an example of, he's not denying the facts, right? A paradigm shift is, you're not denying the facts, you are now interpreting those facts through a proper lens. And today, that is exactly what I think Hannah's prayer is showing us what we need to do. This is what Hannah did in her prayer. right? So I want to look at this prayer together. Having a prayer, by the way, is nothing new in the Bible. Now, we remember there's a couple of famous examples. So we know of Miriam, right? Moses' sister, if you remember. What happens during Moses' day is that you have, they just left Egypt, and they run right to the Red Sea, and they have their back to the water, and the superpower of the day, the Egyptian army, at their front. What are they going to do? God miraculously, you know the story, opens the waters, and God, think about this, not only lets the Israelites pass safely through, but he draws in the Egyptians on purpose so that he can drown them. The point is that it is going to be known and established that there's a God in Israel, and he will do whatever he wants. So he's going to set up this nation that they are going to be, a group of slaves are going to take down the world's superpower because God is their God, right? This is the situation that's happening. And after that event, Miriam writes a song, right? Very quick, very brief. Moses writes one as well, but Miriam has one, and here's what it says. Sing, this is in Exodus 15 if you care. Sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. The horse and his rider he has thrown into the sea. Right? Just a theological poem. By the way, song, poem, prayer, those are all kind of interchangeable, intermingled. Miriam writes that after this event. You can fast forward into the Judges when the children of Israel are living in the land, and by the way, they're being very wicked at this time, and God sells them into slavery to a king named Jabin. He was the king of Canaan at the time, and this Jabin had a general, and his name was Sisera. Famous story, right? So Sisera, they oppressed Israel for over 20 years, exactly 20 years, and the Bible even says that it was brutally oppressed, the nation of Israel. God, we don't have time to go through the story, but God miraculously brings about where this general Sisera is defeated, and Jabin is defeated, and God uses a man named Barak. Famous story, if you remember, where the woman, Yael is her name, she comes and she grabs a tent peg and drives it through this guy's head while he's asleep, this Sisera general. That's a bad lady. I mean, bad in a tough way, right? This dude's asleep. And she goes, I mean, can you just imagine if you were trying to be real at the moment? Like, she has to, at some point, line things up. And then there's that moment before, like, what I'm about to do, you can't undo. And she goes, and she drives his head into the ground. And the glory is given to her for winning this battle. But God, through this miraculous whole event, then has Deborah, in this account, in Judges 5, she writes a poem. She writes a song as well. And here's what she says. It ends with this. So may all your enemies perish, O Lord, but your friends be like the sun as he rises in his might. Well, that sounds a lot like our thesis. You can fast forward into the New Testament. We know that there's an old woman who is barren, very common theme in the Bible, and her name's Elizabeth. She's told that she is going to give birth. And when she describes what the Lord did for her, she writes this little poem, and here's what she says. Thus the Lord has done for me in the days when he looked on me to take away my reproach among people. Remember, in ancient Near East, in the first century Israel especially, to not be able to have children was looked on as a curse from God. You're not able to live out what God has designed you specifically to be able to do. She is saying, Elizabeth, and again, no fault of her own, right? The Bible is replete, though, with how God takes credit for these things. He closes wombs. He opens wombs still to this day. Just because we claim to be in this scientific age doesn't mean anything's changed. God is in control of all these things. Elizabeth was visited by a famous relative. We know her as Mary. And she entered the house. And I want you to get the picture here. Get the picture. Maybe you've never heard this before. That's okay. Who is Elizabeth going to have as her baby? Famously, John the Baptist. Third trimester, John the Baptist leaps in the womb of Elizabeth when first trimester, Jesus enters the house. Powerful displays of these realities here. And Elizabeth, inside of that, writes a poem. Writes these famous words. You've heard them, I'm sure. Blessed are you among women, and blessed is the fruit of your womb. Probably the most famous one, the last one, Mary, right? Mary, she's a young girl, She's visited by an angel, and she's told that she's going to give birth, but not as a barren woman. Remember, the story is always progressing, and it's reaching a crescendo. It used to be the barren woman gets this reversal. Now there's going to be a virgin woman because the Son of God is going to be born. She's told, you're going to give birth as a virgin. She finds that she's pregnant, and once she visits Elizabeth, which is the confirmation of what the angel told her, she writes a song of praise. And in this song, she highlights how the Lord brings down the mighty and he exalts the humble. And here's what she specifically said. He has helped his servant Israel in remembrance of his mercy, as he spoke to our fathers, to Abraham, and to his offspring forever. She goes back to the covenants. God is God of covenants. The common theme in all of these prayers is the reversal of fortune. Something's happening and God's going to reverse it. The one thing, right, that these prayers have in common is that the people who give them were utterly dependent on divine reversals. God had to do a thing or that thing is not going to happen. You are going to be lost if God doesn't move. Have you ever been there? One of the things I've told my family when we one time had multiple times in our lives, so I'm thinking of multiple events that I could bring up, where we've had to come to our kids and say, listen, if God doesn't move in this specific situation that we're facing right now, we are going to fail. I want you to know that Dad doesn't have a plan B here. This isn't like, well, I'll do this, and then if this doesn't happen, I'll do this. If God doesn't show up, we're going to fail. And why would I say that? Because I want to bring fear into my kids' lives? No, I want them to actually know who God is. I want them to see how God moves, not just in Dad, but in the family. And so, this is what we see here. We are utterly dependent on divine reversals. And today, in Hannah's prayer, right, 1 Samuel 2, this prayer has something to say to you today. Now, this prayer, remember, God doesn't change. This prayer to you is saying, this is how God's people think. So the goal of us today is to lean into this prayer and to see, do I think like that? And if you don't think like that, why not? We all need places that we have to be exposed to truth to change. The goal of this prayer is to say, here's how God's people think. God doesn't change. So do you think like this? Remember, God does divine reversals in humble hearts, those who call on Him. This prayer, again, as we're setting up the book of Samuel, think about this. In one sense, we're still at the beginning stages of Samuel. We're still setting the entire book up. We've done the thesis. We've started, and I find it fascinating that God starts the most cataclysmic event in Israel's history, probably with a barren woman. A barren woman, right? Most of the faithfulness that we can find in Scripture a lot of these faithful words have come from the mouths of women. He starts with a barren woman. And it's paradigmatic. By that I mean there's this pattern that God establishes here, right? Hannah is saying this with this prayer. Her individual experience that we're about to read about, her individual experience is actually the rule for God's people now. This is how you should do it. Okay? So this is what I mean. It's a paradigm of how we should understand and view all of the experiences that you have ever had in your life. It should be through this right here. This is an important chapter. This is why it's at the beginning of the book as we have this trajectory now into how God's going to unpack His story. He's saying, when you read this story, you read it through this lens. This is what we're here to do today. Grab the lens. Okay? You with me? As we read, look for the paradigm and watch for the divine reversals. Okay? This is what our task is for today. So let's read the verses, and then we'll kind of walk back through them together. Starting in 1, it says this. And Hannah prayed and said, my heart exalts in the Lord. My horn is exalted in the Lord. My mouth derides my enemies because I rejoice in your salvation. There is none holy like the Lord, for there is none besides you. There is no rock like our God. Talk no more so very proudly. Let not arrogance come from your mouth. For the Lord is a God of knowledge, and by Him actions are weighed. The bows of the mighty are broken, but the feeble bind on strength. Those who were full have hired themselves out for bread, and those who were hungry have ceased to hunger. The barren has borne 7, but she who has many children is forlorn. The Lord kills and brings to life. He brings down to Sheol and raises up. The Lord makes poor and makes rich. He brings low and he exalts. He raises up the poor from the dust. He lifts the needy from the ash heap to make them sit with princes and inherit a seat of honor. For the pillars of the earth are the Lord's, and on them he has set the world. He will guard the feet of his faithful ones, but the wicked shall be cut off in darkness. For not by might shall a man prevail. The adversaries of the Lord shall be broken to pieces. Against them he will thunder in heaven. The Lord will judge the ends of the earth. He will give strength to his king and exalt the horn of his anointed. And then verse 11, then Elkanah went home to Ramah, and the boy was ministering to the Lord in the presence of Eli the priest. Okay, that's a lot. But I want to take it in chunks, because I think, again, there's a lot that we can look at here. So I'm going to start with the 4, and I'm going to keep our thesis on the right-hand side here, just so that we can keep that in view. This is in line with how the thesis will go now in verse 4, but with the other verses, I'm going to keep it there. I want us to focus, again, on just kind of, we've done the chunk, and again, this is the prism. So let's just kind of break it down a little bit, and then we'll make some application points here. Okay? First thing that we see, and Hannah prayed, this is verse 1. And Hannah prayed and said, my heart exults in the Lord. Okay, so that's significant, right? We're already over here into 4. My horn, and that's a key word, my horn is exalted in the Lord. Now let's stop there. Horn. Why horn? Get the picture, right? This is how they anointed people, but get the picture when you had the 2 rams that would bow up on each other, right, on their hind legs, and they would crash into each other. They did that until, one alpha male was left standing. So the horn would be a symbol of strength, this idea of strength. My heart exalts in the Lord. My horn, in other words, her strength, it's only exalted in the Lord. And she goes further. My mouth derides my enemies. And all of the good Baptists in the room go, hey, we're not supposed to do that. You're not allowed to deride. You know what deride means? Make fun of, right? Ridicule. We're not allowed to do that. What do we do with that? She's saying, I have strength, but it's not, listen, her strength is not in her fertility. We know this, right? Her strength is not in her own power, that's for sure. She's saying, my strength is in the Lord, and because of that, I deride my enemies. But there's a because here, because I rejoice in your salvation. In other words, the very idea of having my horn or my strength in the Lord naturally rejects the way the earth or those in the world have strength. There's this repudiation or an indictment. If you say this is true, what are you really saying? Everything else that's not this is false. There's an implicit indictment. If I say I'm telling the truth and you say something opposite of me, that naturally infers that you're a liar or that you are lying. Her mouth derides her enemies. Why? Because she exalts in the Lord and they don't. What she boasts and praises is at odds with how the world views anything, certainly strength. I think that's her point here. She's rejecting what the world trusts in. Because why? She rejoices in the salvation of the Lord, right? In your salvation. It's really important. What do we have in view here? I think just even in these verses here. I think right away you have Peninnah. At minimum in the story, you have Peninnah in view here, right? Someone who has been boasting in themselves, ridiculing her. She's making a sharp distinction here between those whose strength is in the Lord and those who have strength in themselves. When we again celebrate the Lord, we repudiate, and I think that's the key. We repudiate all other sources of strength. That's, I think, what we're getting at here. Let's continue. She says, there is none holy like the Lord, for there's none besides you. No rock like our God. Talk no more so very proudly, which we love to do, by the way. Let not arrogance come from your mouth, for the Lord is a God of knowledge, and by him actions are weighed. This is really a cool part here. Sometimes, and I say this I'm not a fluent Hebrew reader. I can read Hebrew. Sometimes when you get into the original languages, it adds another layer. That's all. You have a perfectly good translation here, so what I'm not saying is that one is I would just say English translations are fine. I will say sometimes when you get into the original language, it adds a layer of color. It might turn your text from black and white to color, as they love to say in Hebrew class, right? Here's an example of this. When you read this verse, talk no more so very proudly. Okay, if you were to literally translate this, it would literally say, well, this word here that they translate very proudly is actually, let me put it up here, is actually Gilboa, is how you say that, and that just means high. And they say it twice in Hebrew. If you were to read this directly, it would literally say, do not multiply speech high, high. And you go, you kind of see where your translators helped us out here. They did a bit of interpreting for you. They didn't just say the words directly. The literal translation would be, don't multiply speech, high, high, let no one, and then they would keep going, right? They did a little of interpretation for you, meaning they're like, well, yeah, what they're saying is like, don't have high speech, don't be arrogant, right? But it's interesting. When you think about, right, don't multiply speech, Gilboa, Gilboa, what does that have to do with the rest of the book? There's a paradigm here. The idea of height and strength is now our physical appearance, right? God looks at the heart. They are looking at the outward appearance, something that's high. That is now, in this book, going to be brought low. And then, so again, height gets cut down. Who, in this book, is described in physical stature terms? Well, automatically you got Saul, famous one, right? Goliath. You can get his stats. Saul is just said to what? He's said to be a head and shoulders taller than the rest of Israel, of all the Jews. Goliath is given, again, his stats of height. Both of these men, right, don't talk, right? Don't multiply your speech. Gilboa, high. And then throughout the rest of the book, those that are high are brought low. Again, a powerful, I think, just again, what they're doing is, again, the prism is setting us up to view these things as we unpack the story. High or tall is now said throughout the book, and it's never a good thing. They're going to be cut low. These guys, again, specifically, these are probably the most famous examples, Saul and Goliath. By the way, Peninnah, in one sense, would be described as high because, there's this sense of self-sufficiency and strength. These guys are explicitly described that way. What do you see? I mean, they are large in real life. I guess the point I'm trying to make is they're large in real life in terms of just big men, but they're also very large in their own eyes, very large. And God's gonna cut them down. I think that's the point. So don't talk, Gilboa, Gilboa. Let no arrogance come from your mouth, right? Why? What does this have to do with arrogance? Right? For the Lord is a God of knowledge, and by him actions are weighed. In other words, the bows of the mighty or Gilboa, those are the ones that are broken. The others are bound on strength when your horn is in the Lord's strength in that way. Okay, let's keep going. We also then have the thesis verse. If this is 1, 2, and 3, then we have the thesis verse, which I think is the whole point. The reason I want to lead this up is because you can always point these to different aspects, right? It is what everything is driving. This is the kind of the engine of the whole thing here. All right, let's keep going. Let's go to 5. I want you to see something here because I think this is the critical part here where we start to see. So we have a paradigm here. Now we're going to see... Hey, how about that? Now we're going to see the divine reversals. I think this is reversals. Okay. In this section, we're going to see divine reversals. Now, what do we have? Those who were full, now they have to hire themselves for bread. Those who were hungry, the opposite, They're done being hungry, right? You see this? So this is this and this is this. The barren, I think that's the key here, is born 7. Why 7? Complete number, right? So just in the idea of having the best amount of children. And he and she who has many children is forlorn. Right? Sad, lonely, etc. God is starting to do the prism that I think Hannah has given us now is starting to be, you see these divine reversals. And then I want to show you here, again, what does this have to do with this? Notice how when he is describing these things, right, these reversals, if you're full on your own strength, you're going to be starving. And the opposite is true. If you are in a position of being hungry, but you are hungry in the Lord, as it were, you are humble and submissive to Him, you will be brought to food. In other words, you will be satisfied. And then vice versa. But notice how he then connects barrenness with resurrection. Right? So you have this. The Lord kills and He brings to life. That's resurrection terms, right? He goes down to Sheol, that's explicit, and then He raises up. In one sense, we could make the argument Hannah was dead and she was brought back to life. Functionality-wise, do you see the connections? I think we're making this on purpose because in one sense, she was given her life back. Right? She was resurrected, if we want to use that term loosely. So we'll just call this, again, like a resurrection connection. So we'll say barrenness, barren, and I think resurrection. We see that here. What do we see here? I think then we see status. We see status here. And I want you to notice as we think about these things, how much God takes credit for. Some things we don't like Him to take credit for. How about the idea that He kills? There's this sense where we would say things like, well, God would never do that. God doesn't do that. No, God takes credit for all this stuff. God is the author of life. That means in the good way and in the bad way. He gives it and He takes it. It's up to Him to do whatever He wants to do. He gives life when He chooses. He takes life when He chooses. It's His prerogative. I've never understood how people stand in an indictment manner, in the idea of I'm going to stand in judgment over God when some sort of death is in view. How dare God do that, right? In Christian circles, in apologetic circles, they always talk about the problem of evil. How can there be a good God if there's so much evil in the world? Things like death. I mean, we just heard this horrific, tragic news of these girls, these kids dying in Texas, this camp. This is horrific, and we should mourn such things. But is there injustice in that? Did God do them wrong by doing that? God's in control of that whole thing. He could have stopped it anytime He wanted to. He could have never had it happen. Did He do them wrong? No. Listen, God forbid anything like that happen in this room, and I mean that legitimately. But if it did, could we indict God? No, we would mourn, and we would mourn hard. And we could be raw for sure. But there's no indictment on God. God kills, He gives life. He takes credit for all of it. By the way, He makes poor. And He makes you rich. There's a status reality here. Wherever you find yourself right now, here's what I don't know where you are at exactly, but I do know this. God put you there. Guaranteed. That's a given. That's the easiest, I think, one to answer. If you're poor, God made you that way. And you'll be that way until He says otherwise. On the same hand, and by the way, I think that the wealthy, the danger that the wealthy run into, maybe the added temptation, is that they run a high risk of feeling self-sufficient, of feeling self-made. That's a danger. Because the Lord takes credit for that. And so again, if this is the paradigm that you're supposed to understand your reality through, wherever you're at right now, it's because God did this. And so this now speaks to, how do I respond according to the status that I'm in? If God has called you to barrenness, then the goal is to give him glory within barrenness. And I'm not saying that's going to be easy. If God has called you to a tough situation, I am not saying that's easy. I'm saying it doesn't mean you're there on accident. And it is by design. There's a purpose for it. Nothing is meaningless. Think of the alternative to that. God's out of control, hoping he could affect something. That's nonsense. That's nonsense. He brings low and he exalts. I think that's the key here. If you have status of any kind, high or low, it's because of God. And he's given you the paradigm to understand what God views. You think of yourself high, you will have your bow, in this sense, broken. But if you understand your humility, which is what Hannah has done, you will be bound in strength. Then he continues, 8. He raises up the poor from the dust. He lifts the needy from the ash heap, and he has them sit with princes. We can think of people that this has happened to in the Bible. Joseph is the one that automatically comes to mind. There's plenty others. Have you ever thought, really quickly, when Joseph went through his whole ordeal, and then he sat, right, second in command in Egypt, can you fathom the level of wealth that is? Filthy rich at the world level, right? And God did that. I think in our culture, there's been this apology for wealth, or there's been a push for at least these apologies for wealth, and I don't think that's a biblical notion at all. I think what we are seeing here, the paradigm that we're being given, is that there's a sovereign God who directs your steps. He establishes you where he wants you to give him glory in. And if that's with millions or billions of dollars, fine. And if that's with welfare, fine. You give God glory because he does it. He raises up the poor right from the dust. He lifts the needy from the ash heap. He makes them sit with princes, inherits a seat of honor. For the pillars of the earth are the Lord's. And I think this is the conclusion. The pillars of the earth, in that sense, everything is God's, and he directs all things. He's establishing everything. Wherever you're at, God's establishing it. God is sovereign. I think this is the point. God is sovereign in all things. So you turn to him. Whatever level of strength you've been assigned, you turn to God in humility. If that's much or nothing, you turn to God in humility. This is the point. Okay, let's continue. 9. It says, he will guard the feet of his faithful ones, but the wicked shall be cut off in darkness. For not by might shall a man prevail. The adversaries of the Lord shall be broken to pieces. Well, let's start actually with 9 before I go into 10. He will guard the feet. That's interesting. Hey, how about that? Sorry. He will guard the feet. Why feet? Of all the areas that I think I want guarded, that's not the first one that comes to mind, I'll be honest. This is a weird connection. I don't think it's very weird, but it might be a little obscure at first. Any thoughts come to mind? Can we just be open? And I'm going to connect it, by the way, with here. So 1 and 2. Because we're seeing two different groups, faithful and adversaries. Okay. So guard the feet, faithful, adversaries, broken, destroyed. Any thoughts? I missed it. Ooh, okay. Maybe. We're not there yet. But is there something before? I should have been more clear. Is there something before Samuel? Here's what I'm going to connect it to. You just be a Berean, right? You see if these things are so. He will guard the feet of his faithful ones. What has been happening covenantally since the beginning, right? We know Genesis 3:15, that's going to be my natural go-to. I think Genesis 3:15 is in view here, and I'll tell you why. What's the idea? The idea being After the curses are laid out, right, and that proto-evangelium, right, that first gospel is given, what does it specifically say? It's going to come one, right, that is going to do a few things and something's going to be done to him. What was said was going to be done to him. Say again? Bruise his heel. From Genesis 3 forward, they've been looking for the one, the seed, who is this promised one. They know he's going to sustain injury. That's given in the prophecy, but it's not going to be a mortal injury in the same way, right? So the faithful ones are going to have their feet. I think there's a connection, right? I think there's this tipping of the hat, as it were, a subtle reference back to the beginning. He'll guard the feet of that faithful one. We're still looking for that Messiah, right? The wicked are going to be cut off. And then the adversaries, the opposite, are going to be broken to pieces. They're going to have their head crushed. I think there's a connection here to Genesis 3:15. Against them, right, he will thunder in heaven. The Lord will judge the ends of the earth. He will give strength to his king and the exalted horn of his anointed. Now that's an interesting way. It goes back to the horn imagery. But then he says, he will give strength to his king and exalt the horn of his anointed. Now he ties kingship and anointed. That's interesting, right? Because up until this point, kings aren't anointed. You know who's anointed in the Old Testament before this? Priests. We have a little bit of a connection there within Judges 8 with Jotham, but that's almost beside the point. So up until this point, I think we're starting this transitionary reality, again, of prophet, priest, and king coming into view, and they're all bound by the horn of strength from God himself, right? Those ones are the ones that are going to have their feet guarded, right? Because they're going to actually do the work of crushing the serpent's head. The wicked will be cut off in darkness. For not by might shall a man prevail. Not by might shall a man prevail. Okay. Now, what do we do with all this, right? We have it at the end here that Elkanah went home to Ramah, and the boy, so Samuel, was ministering to the Lord in the presence of Eli the priest. Again, the weak are being bound by strength here. We have a boy with a high priest. This would be a position of weakness, and we have power. Okay. And this boy is going to do what? He's going to break the bow of this guy here. This whole household, this line is going to be extinguished before the Lord, and this new line is going to be brought in. So the weak are being brought into service and being bound on strength. Now, what's the point of all of this? Okay, we've looked at the verses, we've made some observations, sure. But if we're talking about paradigms, a paradigm, a prism to look through the whole thing at, if we're talking about the divine reversals, what's the point? I think the point of Hannah's prayer or song, same thing, is all about submission. This is all about submission. By the way, it's the one thing that we hate the most. Steve and I were just talking about this before service. One thing we hate the most. Do not tell me what to do. Why do atheistic worldviews exist today? Because they want to claim there's no God, because if there's no God, then I'm God. But if there is a God, if I even give a little bit of a foothold into this idea of even what we'll call, not even the God of the Bible yet, but what they'll try to call even, just intelligent design, which is a laughable term. That automatically assumes that there is an authority over me that then has say over me. And I don't want that. I hate this idea of submission. But what Hannah is arguing, again, according to her experience, is what is true for the people of God as a whole. And that argument, that paradigm is submission. Submission. Hannah didn't change God's plan. She aligned herself with it. She didn't sway God because her prayer was so meaningful and God's like, okay, look, I wasn't going to give you a kid, but now I will, fine. That's not how this works. That's how we make decisions. That's not how God makes decisions. She aligned herself with God's plan. This whole prayer, I mean, this is a celebration of what God was always going to accomplish, always. That was never in question. And so here's my question to you. If you ever feel surrounded, at odds, not sure what to do, what is happening in my life, everything's coming undone, I got an enemy, north of me, south of me, east of me, west of me, don't automatically assume that you're losing. That's not the paradigm. That's a worldly paradigm. That's not this paradigm. That's not God's people. God's people don't think that way. I'm not saying we don't fall into that thinking. I'm saying in an ideal world, God's people don't think that way. That's not the call. The paradigm in our lives needs to shift. You don't need an escape. You don't. You need to see things rightly. That's the goal. Far too often and for far too many years, more than I would ever want to admit to anybody in this room. Tammy lived it with me, but more than I'd ever want to admit to you, I was always looking for an escape. Always. Things are tough, let's get. I don't know what I'm doing, let's go over there. I'm not sure, it feels uncomfortable, let's go. You spend your whole life running. Your whole life. I wish I had a man back then. I wish Greg Cash today could go talk to Greg Cash then and say, stop running. Stay, hold. And how about this? How about you pray? How about you spend the next month just praying? That's it. Just pray. There's a paradigm shift. Like appeal to the God of the universe, the one who, binds on strength the weak. Go to that guy. Hannah's song, right? It's not just a poem. This isn't just a poem. It's not just some frilly language that God kept for all the generations, right? It's her reframing the whole story that's happened to her. She reframes it. She's declaring that God is the sovereign author and only and everything all depend on Him. I do not know where you find yourself today. No idea where you are in your life right now. No idea the struggles that you are involved with. I have no idea the insecurities that you deal with. I have no idea all of those things. Not sure. But I do know this. I do know this with the authority of Scripture. I do know this. Wherever you're at right now, wherever you find yourself, God designed it on purpose. Nothing has happened to you out of accidents. There are no such things. God designed it. And God is calling you inside of this situation that you find yourself in, whatever it is, close to God, you submit to Him. Far from God, angry at God, submit, turn. Goal is submission, the very thing that we hate to do. Stop acting like the mighty, right? The high. Don't be those guys. Be the humble. Here's the point of the whole thing. Here's the point. The point is, humble yourself before God. This is the goal. Back to 2:4. Humble yourselves before God because, listen, God breaks the strong. Ones that are strong in their own eyes. He opposes the proud. One thing that the Scriptures make so abundantly clear is God cannot stomach the idea of anybody having pride. When you consider yourself strong, I kind of got it together. Look at all my abilities. You consider yourself that way, you are in danger of God humbling you. God breaks the strong and He opposes the proud, but He strengthens the weak. He exalts the humble. What we have just done is we have looked at Hannah's, in one sense, intro into this book. The author obviously did it, but he used Hannah's story to say, hey, you're about to read this whole book. Do it through this lens. Because I'm going to repeat this lens over and over and over again. And I'm going to show you real-life historical examples of how this principle is true over and over again. You think that's different for this day? It's not. It's not. These principles still apply to you and to me right now. We humble ourselves. God opposes the proud, but He gives strength to the weak. to the humble. Wherever you find yourself right now, turn to God. About to do communion. What a perfect time. What a perfect time to confess. Maybe you've been arrogant. Maybe you feel this sense of self-sufficiency. It's a fine line. It's a fine line of confidence in God and then being arrogant. It's a fine line. Sometimes they call that truth the knife's edge. You got to walk it. Easy to fall into sin there. Maybe you're angry. Or maybe you and God are good. I'm not sure. But I know this. Submit your life to God. Be humble and have your strength, like Hannah, be in the strength of the Lord. That's the goal.